Well, hello everyone. I am Kathy Modine and I've been serving as the director for the Sandbulte Center for Ethical Leadership. I'm very happy to welcome all of you to this speaker series. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you, faculty, for providing this opportunity for your students to attend as well. This event is sponsored by the Sandbulte Center for Ethical Leadership in the Stender School of Business and Technology. This center was created through a gift from Minnesota Power and Elite Company to honor its retiring chairman and CEO, Sandy Sandbulte, who is with us today. Thank you, Mr. Sandbulte. Good to see you. You are joining this webinar via Zoom. As you know, if you're new to this platform, please take note that your camera and microphone have been turned off and muted. We will have 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for your questions, but feel free to type your questions at any time into the chat box, and we can relay them to you at the end of the session. You'll also have some time for open mic as well. Our co-host, Eric Norgren, will be recording this session as well as monitoring that chat box for us. And Regina Adamy is also here to assist with any audio or visual issues. If you happen to lose your internet connection, please feel free to log off, and if you can't get back in, call in using the phone number that was provided for you on your invitation. I think that's all the housekeeping I need to do. I wanted to tell you that I had the pleasure of meeting our guest last week, and I'm honored that she's taking time out to share her experiences with us. I've asked Dr. Rick Revor, Dean of Strategic Development at CSS, to introduce her, and I think he's also going to tell you a little bit about that special room that we're recording from today. So, Dr. Revor?
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks for attending the speaker series. I would like to welcome our special guest. Kathy mentioned Sandy Sandbulte is joining us, and also Bruce Stender is joining us, both of whom are former chairman of the board of Minnesota Power Elite. This is an exciting day. This is our first presentation from the brand new Elite boardroom in the Stender School of Business and Technology. A year ago, when we named our school in honor of Bruce Stender, Elite made a gift to build this boardroom and to support educating our students on the role of boards in best practice public company and nonprofit governance. The room includes state-of-the-art video conferencing technology, ideal for hybrid teaching and for hosting remote speakers and meetings. Faculty and students will use the Elite boardroom for classes, meetings, conferences, and student collaboration. St. Scholastica is fortunate to have a long-standing partnership with Elite. Their executives have served on our board of trustees over the years. They serve as guest speakers in classes. Their employees are students in our classrooms, and they hire our students for internships and full-time positions. And of course, they provide us with reliable, clean energy that powers our campus. The college is so fortunate to have a deep, long-standing partnership with Elite. We are thrilled to have this new boardroom. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Deb DeLuca, Executive Director of the Duluth Seaway Port Authority. Deb was appointed Executive Director of the Port in August 2018, becoming the first woman to take the helm of the organization in its 60-year history. She is President of the Minnesota Ports Association. She serves on the Executive Committee of Apex and on the board of the Iron Mining Association and the Chamber of Marine Commerce. She is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She earned a bachelor's degree in molecular biology and a master's degree in land resources. She is an avid outdoor enthusiast and former U.S. national cycling team member. On a personal note, I serve on the Duluth Seaway Port Authority board and have worked with Deb for several years. She's an amazing leader and for the port and for our entire Twin Ports community. Deb, welcome, and thanks for speaking to our group today. Put on my mask.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me here to speak about the Duluth Seaway Port Authority and my work there. I've structured this talk I should also say it's a huge honor to be speaking here in this beautiful room, and it gives me a moment to say thank you to Elite for the amazing work they do for our community. I'm proud to consider Elite a partner in the work we do. About my talk, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my work at the Duluth Seaway Port Authority. It's so multifaceted, it's easy to get off into the weeds, and I'm going to try to avoid that trap. And then I'm going to tell you about my career path and how I got there. I think about the students, you're facing those career decisions coming up, and I want to impart a few of my observations and lessons along the way that I learned. And then if we get to it, I have Director Modine asked me to come up with an ethical dilemma, and I picked one from a previous place of employment that I had. So with that, let me tell you about the Port of Duluth Superior, because I can't talk about the Port Authority without explaining to you about the port. So the Port of Duluth Superior is located, I wonder if I can, a pointer, of course, here at the western terminus of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway system. The port itself is the largest port by tonnage in the system. So the largest port in terms of the tonnage of cargo that moves through the port. On the Great Lakes, and about 20th in terms of nationwide ports. That varies a little bit year to year. But a couple things about our location here. Of course, we need to be connected by a waterway to the ocean in order to be an international shipping port, which is what we are. And so, of course, this Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway system is a binational system. It's surrounded by 8 states and 2 provinces. So think about that. It's governed both by, we share governance between Canada and the US. Rick mentioned the Chamber of Marine Commerce. I serve on their board. That is a Canadian organization. In any event, through this waterway, we are located 2,340 miles from the mouth of the Atlantic. It takes about 7 days to get there, and about another 8 days to get to Northern Europe. And it's a total of 18 days to get to North Africa and Italy. And those are our primary, from the maritime perspective, we get actually cargo from all over the world. But in terms of a lot of the wheat we export, and I'll talk about that in a moment, that goes to those locations. So with that, one other comment. We're also located about 400 miles east of the geographic center of the North American continent. And why is that important? Well, think about that. We're perfectly located to serve as a portal for goods, raw materials and finished goods into and out of that North American heartland. To move heavy cargoes on water, that's the most efficient way to environmentally friendly and efficient way to move heavy cargoes long distances. So this is a great feature of our community. And the port itself this is a picture of the port where we just mentioned the binational waterway. Here we have a bi-state, bi-city port, right? Duluth, Minnesota, Superior, Wisconsin. There's 21 active terminals or docks, if you want to think of it that way, in the harbor. And most of those are privately owned docks. Ours is a bulk non-hazardous natural resources port. And what that means is most of the cargoes that come out of this and into this port they're bulk goods. So I'll show you another slide in a moment. But they move in out of a chute or on a conveyor belt. We have 2 entrances to this harbor. Sorry about that. The Duluth entry, which is the iconic Duluth Lift Bridge entry. And then down here at the end of Minnesota Point, at the beginning of Wisconsin Point, there's a little opening. That's the natural entry to the harbor. So I think that's what I'll say with this. Of course, a port, if you think about it, can't be a port without excellent landside transportation access. And we have that here in Duluth Superior. We actually have access to 4 Class 1 railroads. And what does that mean? Well, ports usually consider themselves lucky if they have access to 2 Class 1 railroads, because that means competitive rail rates. But here we have 4, so that's wonderful. And actually, the Port Authority, I mentioned that we own the 1 publicly owned terminal in the harbor, and we have access to all 4 of those right at our terminal. We also have excellent highway access, and it's uncongested highway access here in Duluth Superior. So I mentioned the bulk cargoes that move through our port. Iron ore is king. It makes up about half of the tonnage that moves through our port. You know, I think sometimes we forget to appreciate this about our state, but about 80 to 85% of the iron ore that goes into first pour steel making in this nation comes out of Minnesota's Iron Range, and it passes through one of three ports, either Duluth Superior, Two Harbors, or Silver Bay. So all of this goes through the Sioux Locks at the head of, at the mouth of Lake Superior. So cargo, sorry, coal, sorry, I can't see half of my slide. Iron ore is our #1 commodity through the port. #2 is coal, and that is shrinking fast. That used to be, you know, close in tonnage to iron ore, actually, some years. But because of, as you know, changing energy models, this is shrinking. I will say this is low sulfur coal that comes out of Montana and Wyoming, and it travels east. So it serves facilities in the Detroit area. #3 is actually our #4 commodity is grain, but it is our #1 export. 80% of the grain that moves through this port goes out to export, and we're especially strong in wheat. It's highly sought after for bread making and pasta making in northern Africa and in Italy. And then this other category includes limestone, which is actually our #3 commodity, but also cement, salt, and then big pieces of equipment, the general cargo that comes through the Port Authority's terminal. I would like to say that the port has a huge economic impact on this region. If you look at, it supports about 8,000 jobs in the greater Twin Ports region. Thanks, Rick. And about 1.4 billion in economic activity. That translates to nearly $250,000 in taxes generated for this area, and over $500 million in income generated for this region. Thanks. So now let's talk about that. So that's our port. I talked about our waterway, our port, but now let me talk about the Duluth Seaway Port Authority. I chose to put up the picture of the professional staff at the Port Authority, because we're talking about work. And what I do as the executive director is I manage this group of people, and there's also 4 administrative staff that aren't shown here. And then I answer to a board of directors, and Dean Revor is the chair of our board. We have a 7-member board, so that in terms of governance structure, we have there 3 of those board members are appointed by the city of Duluth, 2 by the state of Minnesota by the governor, and 2 by the St. Louis County Board of Commissioners. So we have an interesting governance structure. It's a very effective board. They're very engaged, and I appreciate their work. But I feed information to them, and they make the decisions ultimately. You know, although of course we inform those decisions and provide the direction, the strategy for them to approve. So. But we're a small group. We like to say we pack a punch well above our weight class, because we have a relatively small staff, but we cover a lot of ground. If you can take a moment I won't go through and name all of the positions, but they're very diverse. So these people come with a very diverse set of skills. You know, some workplaces, like you may all be engineers, all doing similar work, or all, but these are all a small group of people, each doing a very specific job, and then they all overlap. Team structure is really important. It's actually what I was looking for when I came back to, you'll see, I owned business in the past, but this is a really energized team. But the Duluth Seaway Port Authority itself, we are an economic development entity. We were created by the state legislature in 1959 before the opening of that St. Lawrence Seaway system. And we have a mission that we state as: we bring business to the port, economic development to the region, and we advocate for maritime and transportation industry. We also own and operate land in the Duluth area. We own land up by the air park I'm not going to talk about, but we also own land down in the port. This is the Clear Public Marine Terminal. We should mention that we make our revenues from leasing, warehousing, and cargo handling. So some of the lands you see, some of the properties in this picture are lease properties, but the majority of it is the Clore Public Marine Terminal. And we maintain those assets, we own those assets, we expand those assets, but we have an operating agent who operates those for us. They are Lake Superior Warehousing. And I'll tell you more about them in a minute. They've been our agents since 1991, and they're very good at what they do. But the Clore has 40 acres of outdoor storage space and 430,000 square feet of warehouse space. We operate the Clore as a multimodal logistics hub. And we call this working partnership between the Duluth Seaway Port Authority and Lake Superior Warehousing. We have a brand for it. So when we go out and sell our services internationally, it's Duluth Cargo Connect. That's something that we established in about 2016, I think. This picture, by the way, you can see the ship coming in with wind turbine. These are actually blades for wind turbines. And this is the type of cargo in terms of the maritime cargo that we handle. This is the type of cargo that we see at our facility. Again, I'm talking about our maritime cargo. What we receive on ships is these big, heavy pieces of equipment that are used in the power generation, mining, manufacturing industries. And so in the lower left here, this is actually a backup generator that went to the Amazon warehouse down in Shakopee, Minnesota. And then this is a pressure vessel in the upper left-hand corner. And I believe this is another pressure vessel all wrapped, but we see generators, pressure vessels, transformers, lots of big pieces of equipment, and we see a lot of wind turbine equipment. In fact, we're kind of known for that. And this year, we have we actually had a record-breaking year last year in 2019 with 306,000 freight tons of specifically wind cargo coming through our terminal, and we're on pace to break that record this year. Some of this, I should say, this year, these projects are going to wind farms in Minnesota, Western Minnesota, South Dakota, and North Dakota, making up parts or all of 176 wind turbines. And we have carried some of the lease equipment in the past. We also, the warehousing component of our work allows us, so the maritime cargo you see kind of passes through, that lane of our business sort of passes through our community. It doesn't often stop here. It's often going to regional projects, even up in Canada or as far away as the Western states. The warehousing, the truck, rail, and warehousing business that we do is really, we operate all of this to help our regional businesses with their freight costs, to give them competitive freight costs so that they can be competitive in the global marketplace. So what you see in this picture over on the left, this is for instance, and one example, this is pulp coming in for the paper mills. And so it gets shipped into us either by train or by maritime, gets stored, and we store it in the warehouse, and then we distribute it we truck it out up here to the paper mills on an as-needed basis. So they're not having to warehouse these goods themselves. They get competitive rail rates to get the stuff here, and then it can truck out on a just-in-time basis. We do, this is OSB board coming in here. Anyway, this warehousing, again, we're always looking to provide sort of supply chain solutions for these regional industries to keep them competitive and to help this stay a competitive location to attract additional businesses. So in 2017, we expanded those services to include an intermodal yard. And that intermodal yard, when you hear intermodal in the freight world, those are containers. And containers are standardized. You know, the containers can move from ship to train to truck seamlessly. The trick is that you need to have an intermodal terminal in order to get those containers onto trains. And before we had this terminal at our location, any of our regional businesses that wanted to export their goods via container had to get the containers to Chicago or Minneapolis. And so, again, this is providing supply chain efficiencies and cost savings. Customers that use this save up to 1/3 on their freight costs, and they put that money back into their businesses so they can hire more people and develop extra lines of business. You can see that our partner in this, Canadian National, in the intermodal world, provides us with access to coastal ports on 3 coasts, so 6 ports on 3 coasts. And one quick example, we have paper mills that have exported for the first time, period, and they've been exporting to Asia because of the availability of this supply chain solution. And finally, the Port Authority invests in infrastructure, right? We have to maintain, we have a small city essentially that we are maintaining and always seeking to grow a little bit down here at the port. So that's a office building in the lower right that we're building out right, or rehabilitating an old building for the Port Authority staff. We have the intermodal yard that we expanded over here on the left. And all of this costs money. So we're always looking at, we're always funding this ourselves, looking for grants, or finding grants. And then, but that's a constant part of our work. I mentioned we also lease. We lease to, we are industrial businesses in the area. An example in the background of this lower picture, the silver tanks in the back, that is the Husky Dock. It's the fueling station for the port. Excuse me. But up front, this is a big industrial employer that Altech, that when they started down here on the terminal in the early 2000s had 35 employees. Now they have 450 employees. And why are those industrial jobs important? They come with very important wages for our community. Oh, thanks. Actually, I know this one. So an average, this is Duluth data actually, and we put the study together to remind the community about the importance of industrial jobs. This is just one tiny outcome of this study, but an average industrial job in Duluth, based on 2016 data, had a wage of $61,000. When you compare that to the rest of the economy without the industry in it, it compares to an average wage of $43,000. So these are good wages with good benefits, opportunities for career advancement, and really importantly, if you're thinking about equitable growth, they're available for people across a broad range of educational preparedness. So I'm telling you all this to show this is a hugely, I'm going to skip this slide, to tell you it's a very diverse lot of we work in very many different arenas of public life and business. How did I get to this job? Well, it is not a straightforward pathway, and I want you to hear that, because there are some people who believe in the 10-year, have a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan, and I don't know. I've always found that if you build your core competencies, seek to understand how things work, and then be nimble enough to respond to opportunities, you can also build a career path that way. I will say I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I was studying biochemistry, although as Rick said, my degree was in molecular biology. I was a very diligent student. I really enjoyed science. I loved the subject matter and the sort of how things worked. But I was on this path. I just assumed I was going to be an academic. I thought I would be a research scientist. It's what I knew. And then I always had a couple of jobs while I was in college. I always had a job at in a laboratory, either a biochemistry laboratory or a genetics lab. And I always had a waitress job as well. I tended to have both of them going on. I somehow found that balance with school, kept different kinds of problem solving going, exposure to different kinds of people. So this was this is the way I was going through college. And then at the end of my sophomore year, 2 things happened. I got a $600 scholarship for excellence in biochemistry, and I got a job at a bike shop. And that bike shop was a racing bike shop, and I'd always ridden for fun and for transportation, but I learned all about bike racing, and I used that $600 biochemistry scholarship to buy a very nice bike at cost. And I started to ride, and by the end of that summer I was racing, and by the end of the next summer I was on the US national team. So this ended up kind of changing my course a little bit, because I kept doing my biochemistry. I graduated actually in molecular biology. I changed slightly. But I was traveling around the country and partly sometimes around the world to taking part in bike races. I was training. I had just a very different exposure. And through that time, I still had when I was home, I would keep a lab job And I was thinking, boy, my gut was telling me this is not what I want to do anymore. It felt reductionist to me at the time. I still thought it was very important. I wanted to find more of a place where I could use applied science. Where could I apply it, as I thought at the time, to sort of a science society interface? So I originally, coming off of sort of a hard charging bike racing background, and this picture, by the way, I only raced 4 years because I was in such a hurry to find out what I was going to do next. Please don't do that in your own life. don't be in a hurry. But I was in a hurry to find out what I would do next. And I thought, well, obvious transition is to medical school. So I applied to medical schools. I applied to 3. I got into my top choice, which was the University of Pennsylvania. And then I didn't attend. A quick description of why that is: life can be messy. My parents were getting a divorce. I was the last kid at Madison, and I for whatever reason, it felt like it wasn't time to leave town. And I ended up instead going on and doing a master's in a program called Land Resources at Madison that allowed me to blend both environmental chemistry. So I took my biochemistry and shifted it toward environmental chemistry, but environmental policy as well. I did a really interesting research project as part of that master's. I took an internship at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in Chicago for 1 summer. My master's program research involved the presence of pesticide degradation products in groundwater and how that affected groundwater quality standards. So a really obvious, I thought my committee wanted me to go on and get a doctorate, but that wasn't what I did. I went and got a job at the Department of Agriculture in Minnesota. It was an exact fit coming off of my master's. They needed to, so first I worked in programs that had to do with water quality and cleanup of sites contaminated by agricultural chemicals. But I also did a lot of writing. I was actually hired to write a document required by the state legislature about pesticide registration and human health risk. And why do I mention that? Because all the way throughout my career, my writing has, opened opportunities for me. That ability to take complex concepts and break them down and organize them in ways that inform decisions has been part of my work throughout my career. So that let me do unique things. I always looked for unique opportunities everywhere I worked. So at the Department of Agriculture, I also managed a legislative commission on Minnesota Resources research project that involved the soils department at the University of Minnesota. And I got involved in a nitrogen management task force. And all these things kind of, you get to see you get to meet different people and understand different ways of working. And I think it's great to take advantage of those opportunities and create those opportunities. From there, I went to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. There was a program that was relatively new and unique. Minnesota had one of the first programs of its type in the country. It's a voluntary cleanup program. You probably know it more as a brownfields program having to do with the redevelopment of contaminated property. Well, why is that important? Because at that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, and by this time it was the early 90s, property was being passed over, and property that had previously been used for industrial purposes or other purposes, but had the possibility of being contaminated, was being bypassed because people feared the risk of being held responsible for cleanup, and instead they were going out to outline green space areas to develop those properties. So this was adding to urban sprawl, right? It was sort of a side effect of the government wanting to clean up properties, which is a good thing, but the fear of risk of that responsibility for cleanup was driving urban sprawl. So this was sort of a way to bring that, to allow for the redevelopment of that property in a reasonable way. So I was first staff in that program, and then I became the supervisor of that program when the original founder or original supervisor went on to other things. And through that, I learned I really enjoyed managing. I liked leading a team of motivated people and motivating them around a mission and listening to, how they think things could work better. And so that was a great opportunity as well. I also got exposed to be setting a policy, not at just at the state level, but also the national level, because Minnesota was a leader, and I'd serve on various national task forces and such. So that was that job. I didn't mention through this time, but I was married through at the end of grad school. But so at this point, I had 2 children, and I had my kids at this point. And I thought I moved on to private consulting, which I thought sounded like a good idea, but the hours ended up being long and the commute was long. And so when an opportunity came to build my own business, I did that instead. So I moved from government sector. By the way, in all of my government programs, I was always involved in young programs, which had which was a good, to me, I thought that was a great place to be, because you had a hand in formulating policy if you were involved in those programs. And usually very interesting concepts were in play, and usually your peers tended to be motivated around that same mission. In any event, I did start my own business when Hennepin County approached me with a revolving loan for a grant that just wasn't working. They were under threat to have to return it to the United States Environmental Protection Agency, who was the granting authority. And they wanted to make this work. Well, truthfully, that the US EPA's program was not working nationwide. So I took the job on a contract basis to work for Hennepin County to see if we could make this grant program work. And I ended up working with the US EPA staff out of Chicago, and working with one staff there, we really found a lot of solutions to some of the fundamental red tape problems with the program. We ended up getting the first loan out in the country, and this loan was for the cleanup of redevelopment of contaminated property. And then, so we did a couple things that changed the program on a national basis. And then locally, I kept adding money to Hennepin County's pot of money, and then developed other grant funds for them. And that kind of grew into a business, because then I developed other clients with similar needs. And so across the top were my 3 biggest clients. They were sort of my bread and butter, because we just kept going after grants. The St. Paul Port Authority, they're a port, they have a river port, but even more, I think more of their business is directed toward industrial redevelopment. And they just amazing work. And so I would help them compile portfolios of grants that would not just fund the work they wanted to do, but we'd often strategize with them on, what are we trying to accomplish, and how can we grow our program. Similar work for the city of Duluth. And then I also have and for the city of Minneapolis. And then I'd have some smaller clients as well, and as well as some private developers and a number of nonprofits. And during this period of time, I also helped start a nonprofit and ran that as well. So this was a great experience, and gave me flexibility while I was raising my kids. But in 2014, by that time, I was what they call a lifestyle entrepreneur. I was running a company, but I wasn't seeking to grow it hugely. Didn't have a dream of growing this big company. And when the opportunity, I loved my clients, but I missed having colleagues. And so when the opportunity came to apply for this job at the Duluth Seaway Port Authority of Government and Environmental Affairs Director, I took it. And you can see the kind of work that I did. I think I've described what we do in general, but as Government and Environmental Affairs Director, I was responsible for their environmental programs, but also for going after grants and the government affairs, both whether it was lobbying for money or for legislation at the federal level or at the state level. So that was my path. And then in 2018, our executive director left, and I ended up applying for the job and getting it. So again, I went from a situation where I was a peer of my colleagues to being the supervisor and in this case, executive director. We had to hire 3 people within the first year. And for a small staff, those are all big positions. And we hired those 3 positions, and then they needed to learn their job. So myself and the CFO, we did a lot of line work. We did a lot of the work that they would do first when they weren't there. And then, and by the way, those were retirements that we were backfilling. And then and then as they were learning their job, and then that we were forming up the team, and coming up with sort of defining our strategy. What did we want to achieve going forward? So I feel like our team is really gelled now. I hope I really, this is a fantastic job in terms of working with a really engaged board, a very motivated staff, a fun team to work with. And then these are just, some of these are sort of random pictures here, but this is one of my board of commissioners members, Tony Surdich with the Northland Foundation, he was on the personnel committee, and that was the day that I was named to this position. This is just some of the other port directors. I guess I wanted to comment, I get to work with other port directors from around the country. These are two of the Great Lakes port directors. What I see, they say that no two ports are alike, and it's true. And each of these port directors have come from a different path through to this type of work. And it's a very interesting area of work. And this is me in front of the Capitol, I believe. My head's chopped off from what I see. Lastly, I'll mention that last year, we were awarded by an international panel of judges, the Port Terminal Operator of the Year Award. And this is, you might recognize Dean Revoir here, as well as our CFO, and then our partners from Lake Superior Warehousing accepting that award in Antwerp last year. So that's how I got to this job. An ethical dilemma. I'm going to go back to my work at the Pollution Control Agency, and I want to explain that grew from a very small program with a few staff. Before I got there too, I had 21 staff when I was there, and the person who had supervised that first and had led that was just a great guy and a lot of vision. But because they'd started with just a couple of staff, they made decisions on contaminated sites and cleanup decisions and reuse decisions kind of on a one-off basis. Like everyone would be a new decision, and there'd be times when the party that had the site in the program would come in and meet just with the supervisor of the program, and they'd kind of make a decision, and then the staff would be told what that decision was, and then that would become precedent for how decisions were made in the future. And that it doesn't work well for a large program because decisions need to be consistent, and they need to make sense from a science standpoint. You got to match up science, society, and economics, and those decisions need to be consistent across the staff and across the program. So as the program grew, that need became more obvious. And when I became supervisor, that is a change that I made, and I worked with the staff to define broad, umbrella level areas of policy. We defined what policies needed to be set in place so that they can make responsible decisions on a day-to-day basis on the sites that they were overseeing. And I think I had a couple of outcomes. One is that it was more consistent for program users. The staff were more engaged and felt better about, they didn't feel like they were being undercut in the decisions that were being made on the sites that they were overseeing. They were engaged in the policy setting process. And several years, and that was all a good outcome. Now, is that an ethical dilemma? I'd argue that it was setting up for an ethical dilemma, because ultimately those decisions that were being made on a one-off basis could be seen as caving into or exceeding to giving that decision to the property owner that came in and wanted to discuss how that decision was being made. Whereas if you have good broad level policy that guides overall decisions, then that I think is a much more responsible way for decisions to be made, especially across a broad group of people. I will say that years later, after I had left the Pollution Control Agency, about 3 supervisors of the program later came to me, called me to see if they could meet for coffee, because the staff had told her that you should really talk to Deb, because we had a way of forming policy that involved everyone, but came up with really good, strong policy. So I felt good about that I had passed that on to them, and that it had sort of become the way that they did business. So with that, I'll open for questions. And please ask questions about careers. I tried to paint for you that I think the young 20s is a really challenging time when you have to make decisions about jobs and you think, oh my God, is this what I'm going to do the rest of my life? But it doesn't necessarily work that way.
Thank you, Deb. I'm just going to remind everyone you can either type a question into the chat box if you don't want to say anything live. Otherwise, please feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand if you want to use the little reaction button at the bottom there. But this is the time for you to get your questions answered. And we also have Linda Boostrom's class with us. I don't know if you've noticed that, but if you have any students in your classroom, Linda, please type their questions in or go to the microphone. We have a very quiet group today.
We do have a couple of questions that have come in via chat. The first one comes from Bruce Stender, and he is asking for your reflection on mentors, the assistance of mentors in establishing your career.
Well, that's a great question, Bruce. I'm actually really glad you asked it, because I would say, going way back to my even college days and on, I was not very good at asking for help. And so I did, and I think sometimes you need to ask for a mentor. I mean, you need to sort of approach someone and let them know you're interested in their help. I do think that that is one thing that the bike racing did for me, because I had a great coach and I understood the value of seeking help, and I think I was always almost afraid to ask because I'd be taking people's time, or I don't know if I thought it would show weakness. I'm not sure what it was, but I wasn't good at it. So mentors through my career, you know, they're not always the people that you report to. There's sometimes I've had fellow staff that I have looked to as models for how to behave. And so I've had some individual mentors, but I would also say I always look, when I work with, whether they were clients or fellow staff or supervisor or someone in another program, there was something about the way that I liked the way they conducted themselves or solved problems or articulated answers and information, I would try to adopt that, and I would ask them about it and seek that out. So I think I had some non-traditional mentors in that fashion, as well as some specific mentors along the way.
Thank you. The next question that had come in, what do you see as the main focus of the Duluth Seaway Port Authority in the next 10 years?
Oh, excellent question. We have been working hard on diversifying kind of the services that we offer to our regional industries in terms of freight solutions. So I see that continuing. There's a couple of interesting projects and some acquisitions that we can't talk about right now, but so I see that continuing to diversify, continuing to try probably to expand our capacity as well down on Rice's Point, and diversifying. I think it's really important to continue to diversify cargo, the maritime cargo through the port. You know, in other words, we saw that coal going away. How is that going to be replaced? And that's not at the port. That's not at our terminal. That's port wide. And then I think also resiliency within the port is another project that needs to be looked at.
I'm going to ask the next question that's come from the class, and I want to make sure that there's a couple others that we'll go back to, but we'll ask this question from Linda's class. Did you ever feel that you made a decision and that you felt like you did the wrong thing? And as a follow-up, what did you do then? Did you admit? Did you try to make it right? Or did you just learn and move on?
God, that's such a good question. And I, you know, in preparing for this, I've not been stuck in a situation where I thought there was a horrible ethical dilemma. Did I ever have to make a bad decision? Or did I ever make a bad decision? I think when I was working for the private consulting firm, they were an ethical firm. They did good work, but I do remember being involved in a project where the adjacent property owners had come to they'd had their homes next to this property that was being expanded out as a trucking facility, and they wanted they didn't like the fact that this property next door to them, that the use was being changed. In reality, the trucking facility, they'd always, if they looked at the zoning, they'd always lived at the edge of this industrial property. But I felt like in the public meetings with them and the interactions with them, I felt that the company did not seek out their needs and their concerns sufficiently. In other words, could the company have done could they have provided some sort of buffer that gave them more comfort? I feel like they could have reached out to that community in a stronger way. I wasn't able to influence it at that point in time, but it did affect. I did move forward with that, both kind of bad feeling and piece of information in mind. Like, it's important to involve community in those kinds of, even if it's for that company inconvenient, it's important.
Thank you. Another question that's come in here. Having plans are important, but with your journey, how have you decided which emerging opportunities to follow?
Darn it. These are good questions. I do try to do the list, the pluses and minuses list. With and I try to think beyond me and beyond the next year. Like, so these are the benefits of making this choice, and this are the negatives of making this choice. These are the opportunities I might be missing, and then eventually, you can grid that out, but eventually you got to go with your gut, because some of the pluses and minuses, the magnitude of them are a little unknown. And of course, if you have family and family considerations, and those need to be part of that plus and minus. And then you can't look back. You can be informed by that decision going forward and think, okay, next time I got to also think about this, but you can't beat yourself up for making a wrong decision.
That ties into another question that had come in as well. Do you have any regrets about anything in your career, or wish that you'd done anything differently?
I try to not do that. I'd be dishonest if I told you that I never second guessed the medical school decision when I first made that for the next several years, when things weren't necessarily going to plan. I'd be like, well, why didn't I just go to medical school? It's such a clear outcome, but in general, that's when I was younger. I really do try to make it a practice just to not second guess. Usually you made the decision. If you take the time and do the pluses and minuses and think through, you made the decision for a reason. So I try to stick with that. And as I said, if I feel like I could have made that decision a little differently, I'd let that inform myself going forward, but I really try to not regret.
Another question that had come in here, this might be something that they can reach out to you separately regarding, but do you know of any positions or internships at the Port Authority or otherwise that connect environmental preservation sustainability with computer science and technology?
Wow, that's a big question. Computer science and technology. I right off the bat, I don't. I would have to think about that more, and I welcome that student to reach out to me. I will say one thing though. I think there's a lot of pressure. I feel like I have children that are I don't know how old, I can't really see all of you, so I don't know how old you are, but I have kids in the young 20s. And I feel like there's so much pressure right now that the job you're going to get out of the gate is going to be the job that is going to change the world and it's going to do all these things. When in reality, I think a lot of times you got to take, you take jobs that that might not meet what you think, everything that you'd love to do, but maybe it has the computer technology, and you keep yourself informed on the environmental sustainability, or vice versa, because it's really, really important to learn your core competencies, and then get into the system and understand how it works. And then you can start that. In other words, unless you're in there doing the work, you don't really understand how you can how you can influence it. Hope that helps, but feel free to reach out to me on the internship idea.
Thank you. And another question from the class: do you ever feel like you've sacrificed time with your family and children in order to pursue your career?
Great question. I feel really lucky because I had that time. I guess I didn't express this, but while I had my own company, one of the reasons I did that was because I could do it part-time. So there'd be a couple times during the year when there were a lot of grants due at once. But for the most part, I was able to do that part-time. I got, I had a decent billable rate, and so I had flexibility to spend. I had my children relatively late, and I knew I wanted to spend time with them. I didn't just want to have them, and I wanted to be involved in them. So I was able to do that through all those years. And I really appreciated that. I think I will say, I think everyone's path through work and parenthood is different, and you got to make your choices very deliberately.
That covers the questions that have come in through the chat so far. If anyone else has another question here, I know we're getting close to the top of the hour as well, but might have time for one more if you want to put it in the chat or unmute to ask directly.
Eric, could you just read the comment from Lori Anderson as well? It's a nice appreciation.
Yes, no problem. Lori wanted to reflect that she appreciates you sharing that there's not always a clear or straight path, and how building your skills, competencies, and being nimble is really important. And then there's two questions that I think are kind of tied together that we can use to wrap this up, and that is, can you express your experience as a woman moving up the ranks in the business world? And from the class as well, alongside that, what do you feel most proud of in your career?
Oh God, these are such good questions. Okay, so I think about the women in the professional field because I get asked a lot about that, and I so often wonder, is it different for the women who are starting out their careers now? Is it going to be different? I think, I often worked with predominantly men, or at least workplaces that were definitely male dominated, and I don't mean in a bad way, just more men than women. So I realized in retrospect that I developed early on sort of I wanted to be heard. So I think in my early career, I think I sometimes was a little bit too firm and strident in my belief or in my statements. But that's how I felt like I needed to be heard at the Department of Agriculture. At the same time, I always felt like I often found myself on the flip side of that, sort of soft selling my ideas, and it's almost, it's dichotomous. You're trying to seek how you can be heard within the group that you're working within, and if you're if you're young, you don't want to come on too brash. So I don't know how much of that was youth and how much and then, but at the same time, you want to be clear in your ideas so that they're accepted as adult ideas. And so I think I was very aware of that initially, but as time has gone on, I feel that, I feel like I've been respected by my male peers. I've never had to deal with any uncomfortable sexual harassment situations. And in that way, I felt very fortunate. Oh, sorry. Second question was, remind me, it was proudest. That's tough because okay, that's easy, I guess. I'm really proud of the work that we do at the Port Authority right now. I'm very proud of the team. I didn't mention that after I was done cycling, I did some coaching here and there. And there's something about seeing this team work together really well and see the blend of skills they have and see how passionate they are about their work. And I guess I have to say that that's probably what I'm proudest of, is that the team, our relationship with our agent, and the work we all do together.
Great. Thank you, Eric, for facilitating this session. And thank you again, Deb. What a pleasure it's been to have you with us today. Thank you for taking time out and sharing all of your experiences. And thank you, everyone, for joining us from the special guests that we had with us that Rick introduced to you. We have faculty, we have staff, and we have students. What a great group. And I just thank you for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me here.